Oh, less than 5 seconds. Hi, everybody. Joe Moore here, Psychedelics Today, joined by Chad Charles. How are you today, Chad?
So far, so good. Having a good day.
Fantastic. So I'm excited for you to join me. Our mutual connection, Malin Utau, connected us. Um, kind of a major help in our world. She's been an advisor for a long time for us and was contributing a lot to what I considered early 5-MeO DMT research, which I found really helpful. And she helped shape my opinions quite a bit. So I'm excited to get to know you and understand your work. And let's start. Could you give us a little bit of an understanding of uh, broad arc of what you do in the space right now?
Sure. Yeah. I'm an educator, a mentor, and a practitioner. I work with 5-MeO-DMT in a therapy context. So I might say therapy assisted 5-MeO-DMT experiences. Sometimes I call them ceremonies. So therapy, ceremony together. I work almost exclusively one-on-one with clients, and I work in a sort of what I would call a psycholytic psychedelic hybrid. I work with the pure molecule, um, and I've been working with 5-MeO-DMT exclusively for this is my 10th year. So I started in 2016. And over time, I've come to also be in service to other practitioners around the world in a mentorship role. And I lend my voice, like I am here, by way of education, not just about my own practice, but moreover, how we can better understand experiences with 5-MeO-DMT, dispelling some or many misconceptions, myths, and so that would be the global picture about how I operate in the five space.
Thanks. And before we dig into who you are as an individual, can we have a little bit of an idea of what you think 5-MeO DMT is? Like how do you define it? What kind of
Mm,
experience can come up?
yeah. Oof. I use a lot of metaphors. I use a lot of analogies, simply because otherwise we're just effing the ineffable, which is fun. And it's very, well, as the definition of the word is indescribable. One of the ways that I describe having an experience with five is that really what's happening is you're looking into the clearest, most honest reflection of a mirror that's right in front of you, where that mirror has no edge. It goes on forever. There's nothing else other than yourself of what you can see. And when you bring it into your world, when it's coming into your system, into your body, into your psyche, that mirror just becomes closer and closer and closer. And so you're having an experience really of yourself. And of course, when that mirror comes right up against your eye, and again, metaphorical, this isn't literal, um, you are touching your own reflection to the point where your eye, uh, becomes the reflection, becomes anything that it could see outside of itself, to the point where you are that mirror. That mirror is you. There is a merging of subject object relationship. And so you're not really, I take away the attention to having an experience with a substance. You're really having an experience with yourself.
Right. Interesting. Okay. And any response to when people start calling it fancy sounding highfalutin names like God molecule or things along those lines?
That's fine. I don't have a lot of judgment or opinion about it.
Hmm.
God molecule, Jaguar. It's there's a degree of it being unfortunate that it is a dimethyltryptamine, and so it gets heavily confused with DMT, not really understanding that there are so many DMTs, And so having a moniker, having a name for it sometimes is helpful and sometimes not. So I simply call it 5 MEO DMT, not to confuse people with a string of numbers and letters, but to just be really honest and specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So let's rewind the tape. What came first, five or therapy for you?
Mm. Therapy. So prior to being a practitioner, my background in working with people in altered states of consciousness, non-ordinary, whatever you want to call that, trance states, was conscious connected breath work. And so I had a practice of doing group work as well as one-on-one work in a therapy context with just breath. And so that really sharpened and honed an initial skill set in working with people one on one. Prior to working with the medicine, I kind of look at conscious connected breath work as a little bit as my training wheels before I started working with five.
Can you give me um, a little bit of background on conscious connected breath work? Is that kind of in the rebirthing Leonard Orr lineage, or what is that method?
Mm, yeah, I love that. I think of it as a sort of non-denominational umbrella term in that it could look like a lot of things. There's a conscious work with the breath, and the connection is really looking at the connection between the inhales and the exhales without a pause. I would say what typifies conscious connected breath work as a modality is that it's not really seeking or looking for creating emotional abreactions or cathartic moments, although that is possible. It's not the goal or the objective.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm seeing conflicting things online here about who kind of came up with it and the origin stories. That's funny, but yeah, I like that. Just breathing and let's see what happens. And that's what I say in breath work too. Breathe till you're surprised and just see what
Right.
happens. It doesn't have to create
Yeah.
an abreaction. An abreaction being, for those who aren't familiar, kind of an alternate term to something like a cathartic thing that looks really big. Um, yeah. So cool, cool. That's great. And over time, did you like therapy is very helpful. It saved a lot of people. Did you get a sense at a certain point in history that therapy might have some limitations?
With five, you mean?
Therapy alone.
Oh, therapy alone. Hmm. Yes, because to some degree, I mean, it depends on what kind of therapy we're talking about, but to some degree, there is a limitation of just having the sense of self online, the self identifier that is there. And what I've learned through trance states is that there are enormous benefits in having the attachment that the eye has to its own experience to be diminished to various degrees. And of course, with five, you have the absolute detachment as a potential peak experience there. And so seeing the benefits of when there isn't an attachment to cognitive recall or processing, um, that can do a lot more in some circumstances than being attached or focused on uh, narrative reconstruction, etc.
Mm, yeah, interesting. Thank you. And then how did this kind of larger psychedelic topic show up and or 5-MeO specifically?
In my life. Yeah. Well, I was first introduced to the substance in a very haphazard, reckless way via a particularly controversial practitioner uh, offered to me in a way that, well, I mean, I wasn't taking responsibility for myself, and I definitely wasn't in a what I like to call a solid, safe, secure, and sacred container. And all went well. lucky me. And from that point on, I continued to have other experiences in a variety of contexts with a variety of practitioners. So that was my introduction to my personal story with Five. And then I began a sort of apprenticeship with a small collective of practitioners in Mexico City a couple of years later.
Yeah. Now, can you describe the experience a little bit? Your first one coming from kind of, let's say it's like five naive brain to,
Mm.
then you had the big experience. Like, was it a bit major transition or earth shattering moment for you at all?
Well, yes and no. I would say that at that time, I was engaging in a lot of different self-development, spiritual development practices. And so I can't really single out that first initial experience as being more or less impactful on my life than any of the other things that I was doing at the time, whether it be myself in therapy, other substances, etc. So I can't really parse it out. That being said, it was definitely there was something there that compelled me to continue working on with that substance, and to this day, I just trusted something. I wouldn't really know how to articulate it. Yeah.
So still ineffable. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
right. That's interesting. Did you have any kind of, religious studies background, kind of like broader kind of exposure, any kind of mystical thinking before that moment?
Yes. If I go back to just my early life, I grew up in a very, I'll call it a new age household. My one of my parents was a leader in alternative healing therapies where I grew up. So I was just immersed in and surrounded by, would say, spiritual materialism, and my mom's guinea pig for all kinds of new things that she was learning and training in and then offering clients. So right from quite a young age, like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, prior to being a teenager, um, ideas of karma, practice in meditation, processes of divination, were all a part of my early, persona construct. Yeah.
Cool. So like mysticism and kind of like the new agey spiritual materialism context, not necessarily in like the kind of more classical context where we're like, shooting for, one star in sight kind of a situation. So
Yeah.
okay, cool. Yeah. So you had kind of like a general milieu. That's interesting. Okay.
Yep.
And then what happened in Mexico that made you want to keep going?
I was, in the kind of magical way of making a connection here, making a connection there, definitely seeking out experiences for myself. I was pointed in the direction of going to Mexico City, kind of not knowing why I was going to Mexico City.
Mhm.
Initially meeting a practitioner there, my initial assumption was like, well, I'm going to be working with the medicine more with this particular person, and then I was introduced to all these other practitioners, and pretty soon I realized that they were kind of in an not in an explicit way taking me under their wing and showing me and teaching me everything that they collectively come to understand of how to work with the medicine, what it's all about, etc. And I kind of naively didn't really understand that until a certain time where I'm like, oh, I'm sort of being groomed here. I'm sort of I see what's going on. But it was very it wasn't a plan. It wasn't something that was like, this is what I'm doing. Mhm.
Right. Um And were you seeing major helpful experiences for yourself and others at that point? Were you serving it to others?
Well, I wasn't serving anyone until there was a certain point where one of my mentors very spontaneously in the moment said, okay, Now it's your time to serve this next client. I was like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, wow, wow, okay. I didn't see that coming. So it really it was a surprise. But what was I seeing? Yes, absolutely, incredible. um transformations, what I like to call just an acceleration of what's happening for people already. Typically, people are coming into these experiences, and I would argue that this is largely for, with any substance use. They're looking for change. And they're wanting change in their life in some regard. Maybe they know exactly what they want or think they know what they want, or it's something a little bit more nondescript. And these experiences really accelerate uh, that process for them. And I saw that in myself, definitely. And I was seeing that in pretty much everyone that I was witness to when I was in that so-called apprenticeship in Mexico City at that time, the winter of 2015, 2016. Mhm.
Right on. Great. And so it sounds like you're kind of in the room for a lot of these things, not necessarily consuming every time. But was there a lot of kind of like as you were apprenticing, also kind of like consuming?
For me, no.
Yeah.
There were some people in that small collective that did consume while they were with clients. That was not, I never saw that as, uh, I never saw that as beneficial, I guess. And it wasn't conducive to um, my learning in any case. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Yeah.
way that I look at it now, not that I was thinking this then, um, but I generally see that as a sort of malpractice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this, forgive my ignorance here. So I assume, and I'm pretty sure actually, that therapy is a licensed profession in Canada. Is that accurate?
No, therapy as a term, and so all this is province by province. Unfortunately, it's not a
Okay.
federally regulated thing. Therapy as a word is not a regulated word by any provincial or political jurisdiction. Psychotherapy is, for example. So if I called myself a psychotherapist, I would probably
Hmm.
get into some trouble. But if somebody wants to call themselves an aromatherapist or whatnot. Like there's not much regulation or accreditation that is required to be recognized uh, by any of the provincial or political jurisdictions. So I use therapy, quite broadly. Mhm.
Okay. Cool. And what kind of training did you come in with? Like, you were doing therapy first, then, and then like what kind of stuff were you educated on? What were you doing?
Yeah. Um, so when I came into the healing arts via conscious connected breath work, I went to a multitude of trainings with a lot of the different schools or brands or what have you. Um, and many of them had quite, I would say, well well put together training programs. Many of them were trauma informed. Many of them amalgamated a lot of somatics, a lot of psychology, a lot of psychiatry. And so I learned a lot through those. And I'm okay with saying I'm not certified in any one thing. And so over time, I just kept on bringing more tools into my toolbox. Continuing education is a very important aspect of my life. It's something I commit to constantly. So what I bring forth, kind of like what is in my toolbox when I'm with a client today, anything from influences that I've had as a recipient of certain therapeutic practices, as well as different trainings that I've had anywhere from um, biodynamic craniosacral therapy to internal family systems to authentic relating and nonviolent communication skills to the exposure to a lot of energy work or, let's say, neo shamanism. And the list goes on, which I can continue on if you want, but a smattering of things all coming together and applied in an intuitive way that is also backed up by experiential competence.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's interesting because I notice in America like the rules around psychotherapy and therapy in general is like highly credentialed, and people are kind of like, you know, they want to stay inside the bounds of what they've agreed to,
Sure.
by taking on a license, you're set to a certain code of conduct, or
Right.
often they like to call it ethics, but that's the ethics are what you agreed to by taking the license, and it really means kind of like professional conduct. If you want to keep
Yeah.
this, do these things, we'll kick you out, and that's kind of like, I always find that kind of ethics term complicated because I come from a different world. Um, but anyway, that's an interesting thing just to point out. Um, and yeah, what we were kind
I
of
would riff on
lightly.
that if
Please, let's go for
if
it.
you're yeah. I mean, there's the pros and the cons of the regulated fields and the unregulated fields, right? Obviously, I'm working in an unregulated field. It's not to say that there isn't a code of conduct or a code of ethics that I don't adhere to. I do, but of course, who's going to hold me accountable to that? And I think what happens in the unregulated field is that so much responsibility is also placed on a client or a participant or any individual because there are no standards and authority to keep a practitioner to those standards. And so the wide range or spectrum of quality, caliber, competency, as well as integrity is huge. And so, how does an individual know? What are the questions that we want to ask? Because I can't rely on an accreditation where there's a dentist on this corner of the street and a dentist over there. And yeah, they're probably one's maybe better than the other, but generally they all went through the same training. And I can trust that there's a standard applied and I'm going to be in good care. And of course, that doesn't exist in the unregulated field. So each person kind of has to do their homework, do their vetting for the practitioner that's in front of them, and they should. And it's something I highly encourage because like I said, the range of quality and care is very wide. There's really shoddy practice, malpractice, and there's excellent practice. And that goes in just being a practitioner. It goes into also the training of practitioners as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, there's a level of kind of non-criminal behavior that can happen inside the context of these services, like non-criminal meaning they're fine generally. And
Mm.
then there's kind of like, that tighter circle of what is inside the scope of that practice. And then there's legitimate criminal behavior that's just not good. And we saw some of that in the past in the 5-MeO DMT space, and it was really troubling. It seems to have in part simmered out, at least by like the larger cult dynamics. I'm sure there's some smaller things going on that
Mm.
aren't great, but um, yeah, I think it's just worth pointing those things out. Yeah.
Absolutely. And taking from that as a recent past in the world of five, and if I zoomed into things that I'm interested in the right now, and that is uh, clinical research, research studies, and the code of ethics, the ethical approval that is granted to some of the research studies that are out there. If I took the code of ethics that I adhere to, that is below ground or unregulated, many of those institutions that have huge amounts of funding, they wouldn't cut it. the way that they train their clinicians and the way that they introduce these experiences are far lacking in a level of care that I would say is best practice. And that's happening very legitimately with lots of authority and condoned through very official and authoritative political channels. And it's unfortunate.
So
There's a lot of malpractice that goes into some of those research studies.
it would be great to see some detailed writing on that. So there's two groups that got a lot of attention inside the last 3 weeks for drug development around 5-MeO DMT. I think it was
Mm.
Beckley and then also Atai. Is that right?
Those
Both,
are a
I
couple.
think,
Yeah.
slightly different, methods, right? There was one that was like a nasal spray, 8 milligram nasal spray, which is, potentially better than smoking. I don't know. But like, um, I don't know. Let's have you go for it and characterize like what you're seeing in clinical trials that does not seem adequate right now.
Right. Sure. Yeah, happy to. I mean, the ROA aside, the route of administration aside, yeah, the intranasal inhalation, injection, there's a variety of ROAs that could be applied for that. Yeah, there's it depends, what is that ROA? What's the choice behind certain ROAs? Sometimes that's kind of confusing to me, but I would look at first and foremost the way of training clinicians. So
Mm-hmm.
when I think of what's available in the unregulated field in terms of training a practitioner, um, and I look at what's available in training a practitioner in the regulated field, there's just this enormous gap. For example, if I
Mm-hmm.
look at what Five Education is doing, based in Mexico, they have a 9-month training program that has a 2-week experiential residency. Wow. Okay. Interesting. Is it comprehensive? Is it the best that there's out there? Possibly. And I look at something like maybe one of those institutions that you mentioned, and I look at how are they training their clinicians. You're looking at maybe a 40, 50 hour weekend training, and boom, there's a clinician. Um, Sanctioned by all the official channels, and they're ready to serve 5-MeO DMT in a particular setting, usually a clinical setting. That gap is enormous. And so when I think of when I do my own research and I look at, okay, where's a practitioner coming from? Oh, they've done a 2-day training. Wow, it seems terribly insufficient just hearing that alone. Uh, and so I think to myself, how does that ever even come to pass? Something such a high value experience for an individual, maybe one of the highest value experiences that a human being could ever have. Um, Being administered with 2, 3, maybe even 4 days of training. Oof, that's for me hard to swallow. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, and why? Like, why is not having enough experience important?
Um, for a couple of reasons, there's I would say, a very specific. 5-MeO DMT is very specific in terms of how to help. Well, I'm just going to use the buzzword, integrate that experience in somebody's life. The experience itself, if it's not held in a appropriate container that's very unique to five, can be itself prolongation or an initiation of some sort of traumatic event. Um, and a lot of times in those research studies, they're looking at standardized dosing, which, from a scientific perspective, that's what you need. You need a controlled experiment to understand the molecule. And yet, in my experience, standardized dosing, what that does is it's a little bit of a Russian roulette, simply because when you have this amount, this dose for every individual, it is not in attunement to what uh, the nervous system of that individual. It's not an attunement to their kind of like a psychocosmic worldview. It's oftentimes not really vetting the appropriateness for an experience like that with an individual, barring typical metrics and contraindications, etc. And so you have this standard templated formula being offered to a variety of individuals. And for some, great, awesome, perfect, nailed it, wonderful. And for some, oof, that that was that was not good.
Hmm.
And I'm making that very general, but the specifics of what is not good about standardized dosing and how it misses the mark on trauma-informed practice is that a standardized dose that could be something that is really helpful for an individual to exercise a sort of agency in their experience, so a conscious surrender. However, the exact same dose could be what I call a submission experience, which is overwhelming that person's nervous system, which is totally unnecessary. It's not a necessary experience to learn about 5-MeO-DMT. But from a scientific perspective, it seems to be necessary so that we can see, well, what does 12 milligrams administered with this ROA do to an individual? Oof, risky.
Okay. So this is a fun thing that I like to get into often, right? Because when I talk to folks like you, obviously, we in this space have an idea of what's optimal, how do we do it better. Um, but right, like we're not necessarily part of the university or the IRB that said, yes, this is ethical, go for it, right? And like, is there like as we're complaining and like critiquing, I like to
Yes.
say, okay, what would we propose as a better way of doing this science for a similar budget? Like, do you have an idea on what would be better and would get us like similarly good quality data?
In terms of the quality of data, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a social scientist. I don't know. However, I've been a part of some naturalistic studies, and I don't use standardized dosing. And I understand that that is maybe problematic for learning about the molecule and what happens. However, um, there is a what I'd like to what I see is a larger understanding of what is I call the moving target of a dissociative dose. And so I'm using the terminology from an early pioneer in the five space, Ralph Metzner, who looked at, how can we determine this threshold where the entire sense of self or the sense of I is offline, or there's basically a level of unconsciousness. So complete um, dissociation, which flies in the face of what's otherwise known as structural dissociation, different theories, let's say. And so to understand that coming at or approaching an element of dissociation, which is nuanced, can be, it's difficult to make the differentiation between dissociation and transcendence. Um, is to uh, identify and correctly assess with a degree of, I would say, caution, but also respect and attunement, which usually takes place in a therapeutic alliance that's happening between somebody who's offering this and somebody who's receiving this, so that um, we can still learn from the medicine, but not via an overwhelm, which often is, well, I would just say it's the least empowering of the possible experiences with a five. And so, how can we empower individuals all the while learning about the molecule and how it can help us?
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I think, yeah, so what I was hearing earlier in the critique on science, right? Like kind of calling it unethical. But how do we, is there a way towards making that ethical? Because I think high quality, rigorous science is something we need, but also it
Mm,
can be problematic to obtain, right? Like, um, I
yeah.
think one of the major challenges that I have in contemporary science, right, is like animal studies. We're doing some really crazy stuff to animals, and
Mhm.
you know, on one hand, we can make an argument that it is ethical. On the other hand, we can make an argument that it's super monstrous, right? So like giving people in a carefully controlled environment these really powerful compounds is on one hand essential, on the other hand problematic. Like what I was watching with some of the psilocybin trials was people would enter these trials desperate, ready to kill themselves if this doesn't work, and they got the placebo.
Uh-huh.
And it was really, really desperate and really, really troubling. I think in some cases, the the promise was made that you would get the actual protocol if you got the placebo later. But we wanted to somehow
Mm,
control for it so
mhm.
that, like, okay, you do have a little bit of hope downstream, given all the hope you had going into the trial, which also actually complicates the science too. But anyway, like, thoughts on this idea?
Yeah, I think the answer to it, this isn't. I hope that I'm not just blanket critiquing science, but
Hmm.
I think that there's something particular to be learned about working with 5-MeO-DMT, and I think that one of the ways to create a greater sense of ethical practice
Hmm.
in all practice, not just clinical studies, for example, is an expansion of an understanding of structural dissociation frameworks, but also to expand on that to include complete dissociation frameworks. Because 5-MeO-DMT, by I would say its very function, its very nature, I would call it its gift, is a complete dissociation or transcendent experience. And so to understand that, to include that as a framework, is to uh, expand and better inform the ethical considerations when designing a trial or a study, but all the way down to whether it be a retreat leader or a therapist such as myself, to include that as an understanding of we're working with five here, and there's something very specific to learn about that. There's something very beneficial about that complete dissociation, um, and there's ways in which that happens. One is through surrender, and I'm using obviously very unscientific terms here, and one is through submission. There's a way to come into unconsciousness that is beneficial and empowering for an individual, and there's a way in which it's quite regressive and potentially creating its own problematic.
Yeah, love that. Um, cool. And let's start jumping into this idea of like what is good practice, what is bad practice, what is malpractice outside of science, right? But more into like practitioners and you're mentoring folks, so it seems as though you have a really serious idea of like what you think is ideal or less than ideal, right? Like how would you characterize a really good practice?
Mm. A really good practice is um, creating a certain bond, or like I said, like an empathic resonance or a therapeutic alliance, and it that can go into great depths, or it can be kind of cursory. It doesn't have to look a particular way, but generally, it's understanding the importance of that relationship. And in that relationship, there is the responsibility on the practitioner to be very attuned to that individual, the state of their nervous system. Obviously, prior, traumas, for example, the how they respond to trauma triggers, right? The fight, the flight, the freeze, etc. And then it is to also assess, what is it that they're either working on in terms of healing. What is it that they want to explore in their lives and their meaning making of existence and life itself. So getting a handle on a multitude of um, where this person is at. And then um, using what we learned through that assessment to customize the sequence of their sessions and or the dosing sequence within the session, with this idea that there is no standard, this amount of the medicine with this ROA is going to have this experience. There is no, in my opinion, one experience. There is no 5-MeO-DMT experience. There's an experience of yourself that is being catalyzed with having this medicine in you. And it's totally unpredictable. However, we can judge and discern about what is really important and empowering for an individual. And that usually looks like having a iterative or non-templated dosing sequence. For practitioners who are just starting out, obviously having a template is something that they can learn from. We learn from templates. Like, okay, this dosing sequence over time, I see how it changes or what the difference is over a certain sample size of clients. With mentorship, a lot of that trial and error can be reduced a great deal. And so the importance of mentorship, maybe training, apprenticeship, if you're lucky, can really support a practitioner coming into not just best practice, but excellent practice through an even tighter relationship with their client that's everybody wins.
Mm, I like that quite a bit. And then let's do like an edge case of malpractice. If you could like kind of tell a a pseudo fictional story of what like approaches what looks bad, and then we'll
Hmm,
get into what's actually bad after that.
sure. Yeah. Um, okay. I mean, maybe can I just use like, you asked me about my first experience. Like, can I just use
Sure,
my first experience? Great.
sure.
So in my first experience, I didn't know what 5-MeO-DMT was. I'd never heard of it before. I had just uh, spontaneously witnessed because I was just in a circumstance. I was just with this group of people, and I was witnessing people having experiences with it. And in this case, it was the secretion of the Sonoran desert toad, which has its own profile of considerations. But basically, there's here you're going to have, um, it was inhale is the method. You're going to have one inhale. Um, there's no understanding of who I am, what I've experienced, etc. And there is an amount that is placed in the delivery device and the instruction to just here you go, here you go, this is what you're going to experience. You don't I had no idea what it was. There was no information. I didn't take responsibility for myself. I was being quite reckless for having said yes. For I trusted something, but I don't even know what it was. um, and I mean, anything could have happened. There was no attunement between what the dosing was and myself and who I was. There was likely a expectation or a goal or a hope uh, from the practitioner for me to have a certain experience, to have a particular experience. It wasn't necessarily for me; it was also for that practitioner. And when the practitioner is acting um, in a way that is creates a distance from this is for the person I'm in service to, that alone is leaning in on what I would call malpractice. The
Hmm.
question is, who is this for? This should be for this person. Now, once I've identified that this is for them, and I've cleanly and honestly taken away my objectives as a practitioner, then I can start getting into, well, then what is best for this person if it is indeed for them? And so
Mm-hmm.
in my early experience, I had, probably definitely a dose that was well beyond um, my dissociative dose. In other words, it was excessive in the sense that for me to have the potential peak experience, sometimes we call that a full release. The dose that I had was totally unnecessary, completely unnecessary. Um, Luckily, there was no bad, wrong, troubling experience was had by myself. It was all good. And if I hadn't had a sense of already openness in my nervous system, in my whole being, and there was contraction there that was then going to be forced and overwhelmed by this extraordinary dose. Wow, I would have had an incredibly different experience and it wouldn't be good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's a terribly uncommon scenario, right? Like there's no real education around this stuff and here you go and kind of what's next. Some people can return in really rough shape for a long time from something that doesn't look like malicious, but you
Right.
know, ignorant perhaps.
Well, I think this is a common, something that we get really confused by. I say we because I think it's just a very general thing, is that we confound kindness with competency. And I've always been like, well, what does that have to do with it? This person is very, has great intentions and really believes in what they're doing, but that doesn't mean that they have any competency whatsoever. And so to look at like, wow, I resonate with this person, their style and their approach, and yet is there a level of competency of know-how there? And that's a healthy separation that we need to make as an individual when we're going into experiences like this.
Yeah. Um that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And let's maybe talk about what real deal malpractice looks like a little bit bigger.
Hmm. Yeah. Mhm. As I'm thinking about this, I'm gonna just go into the different cases that come to me, people that come to me that I've been able to offer them what I call a corrective experience, uh, a re-encounter with the medicine because they've had a previous experience in some other context with some other practitioner, and it did not go well, and they're still living the residue of something that either wasn't complete or was severely damaging, etc. And so I'm thinking of a couple of them. One was um, somebody that came to me that they had an experience 2 years prior, and they said, ever since that experience, I feel totally lost. I don't know what to do with myself. My compass, I don't know where to direct myself. I don't know how to find purpose in my life. And I'm constantly doubting what I've lived, what I lived up until that experience. And digging in a little bit more of like what that experience it wasn't so much the session itself, but it was the container, the mindset and the setting that was created for this individual that was heavily colored by a signature of uh, different new age, to use that term again, but a smattering of different belief systems. And so there was a compass that was given to this person. This is how to live. These are the best ways to live your life. Um, and then when they're having this incredibly vulnerable experience where, they've basically, died in front of this person in this container that is heavy on the directional component. I'm directing you, I'm giving you these protocols to follow, and I'm offering you all this material to read and to digest, etc. And this person came away from it just being totally confused at what they should do, and it really plagued them for years. And the moment that they came into uh, what I would call, yeah, in general, my set and setting, which is very neutral. It just changed the game. All of a sudden, they found their center, they found themselves, they found their through line and who they know themselves to be. And they were able to course correct onto a direction. Their North Star was clear, and they were able to feel confident in who who they were and bridge the gap between why they went into that experience years prior in the first place, what they're living now, and they needed that course correction. And so when I look at what they experienced prior to that, the malpractice in that is um, creating a very narrow or myopic scope of what this experience means and not leaving enough room for the individual to find the meaning for themselves in that experience. To me, that is a kind of a soft malpractice, but nevertheless has huge impact on people. Huge impact. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's one example.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then we
Uh,
see that even in the breathwork world. It doesn't have to be something as
exactly.
powerful as five. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, coming to maybe another extreme example is what I would consider um, a practitioner using interventions in a full release state. In a way that has not been either consented to, and that's a tricky topic, which I can dovetail into, but also is done in a way that um, is taking a lot of risks. Unnecessary risks. And so I'm really being specific about intervention methodologies when it's reasonably identified and observable that an individual is in a full release. Sometimes I call it a samadhi state, right? The sense of self, the sense of I is effectively not there. There will be no recall, there will be no remembering, but there is life force animating that body, that individual. If it was Bob that ingested the medicine and they're having a full release, Bob isn't there in that moment. And so whatever Bob consented to with that practitioner prior, does it apply when it's understandable that that's not Bob, at least not Bob now in that state? And so using methodologies, intervention methodologies in that zone of time, which is a small period of time, right? We're just talking minutes here, um,
Hmm.
is, I wouldn't say in and of itself is malpractice, but I would say that that is very advanced intervention methodologies that really only a practitioner with a lot of experience that has been engaged in supervision in a co-visible environment with other peers and colleagues in order to just to even think about offering interventions in that incredibly delicate and exposing state. Oftentimes, what happens is that rather than coming to a sense of completion, resolution of what is coming through in that moment when there is what seems to be abreaction, maybe catharsis, but something is being played out in the life. This is the separation between personal consciousness and life force or aliveness. There's the person is not there, their sense of I is not there, but something is lived out and coming through. And so that is a very delicate place. And when somebody is doing something, the practitioner is doing something to that animated body and that animated zone of time is tricky. And I would say a lot of times the most egregious, um, the grievances that come out of experiences are often when a practitioner is doing something with that body, with that animated material, when the person is not there. And that can go from obviously all kinds of abuse, whether it be sexual or what have you. Mhm. So working
Yeah.
with people in an unconscious state.
Right. Right. We're too late into the interview to jump into consent in a meaningful way, in my opinion. But obviously, folks, like if you did not consent to it very soberly, um, outside of a state of duress, like we're not going to do this unless you consent to my practice and methods, like that's super not consent. But I want to talk about like my only experience with five.
Please.
And it was interesting and helpful in that it gave me a little bit of an idea of the experience. It was this protocol that you've probably seen going around. It was kind of like two or three different kind of pens, kind of microdosed pens, and it was like a micro, 5 minutes, a micro, and then kind of like a medium. And it was really interesting. Lasted about an hour in a pretty well curated scenario. People that took it very, very seriously, and it was like, who am I to be taken advantage of in this situation? So I was like, there's nothing, there's nothing I feel unsafe about being
Mhm.
me in that room, which was lovely. So I felt pretty safe. I was like, oh man, am I really doing this right now? All right. Went for it because it was an invitation. It was very open. It was like free, so it was like very very nice that there wasn't really a transactional element to it for me.
Mhm.
So the experience like brought me pretty close to like a wash. Like I can't say pretty close to a breakthrough, but a breakthrough experience, whatever we want to call that thing here
Sure.
in this context. But it was pleasant. It was definitely big, but it wasn't the real deal. Have you been seeing this protocol going around? This would be, kind of more psycholytic if we were talking.
Right. Yeah, sure. There's like stepwise protocols, low five, all of these ways of working with the medicine that oftentimes, yes, a psycholytic protocol where the full potential experience of what five or any substance has to offer is kind of being prevented, usually by different ROAs or different delivery devices. So yes, I've definitely seen that, and it's really seeing a resurgence in the five space in the last years.
And so in the psycholytic capacity, when you're talking about you do both psychedelic and psycholytic dosing, like, is this anywhere close to in line with what you would call a psycholytic thing in your practice?
Yes and no. So what I
Mm-hmm.
do is a psycholytic, psychedelic hybrid, and what that means
Mm-hmm.
for me is that I am using high doses with the possibility of a full release or a breakthrough, if you want to call it, really passing that threshold of the full I not being present. Um, First and foremost, because I see that as the gift and function of five. Like, why is this medicine here? What is it doing? What does it have to offer us? I mean, ultimately, it is that. That doesn't mean it has to happen. There's nothing that I need to force, but I hold it open as a possibility, all the while using five in a psycholytic fashion to work towards that. And that can happen within a session or over a series of sessions. And so I don't hold like a ceiling of like I'm trying not for this to happen. And it's mostly because I recognize that basically a full release can happen pretty much on just about any dose. I mean, this is part of the element. I wouldn't call it malpractice, but I hold this as a golden rule that it's utterly unpredictable, and you can't know when a full surrender can happen, even with a small dose. I'm constantly surprised at individuals who have a full release experience when, oh, that wasn't my intention with that particular dosing at that moment. And yet there it was. And I was fully prepared for it. And I've been preparing this client for that moment. It could happen at any time. Um, and so there's limitations to the psycholytic approach when we're trying to avoid that and trying to keep in this sense of self. I don't have a big judgment like as it's the wrong way to work with five or whatever. I do think of it as a way of like, well, it almost seems to me as that kind of culture grows a little bit that it's being offered by practitioners um, that are scared. They're scared
Mm-hmm.
about that experience. They're scared to be responsible for people having that experience. Um, I see that as a little bit of a fear-based approach.
Mm-hmm. Right. But perhaps it's an okay thing to experiment with as phase one, and then we can work towards a phase two or three.
So,
In like a very medical container, like less drug is always safer. If we're calling it medical, right? Like, one milligram of Xanax is a lot safer than 20, and like, so
right.
yeah, I think there's a lot of things there, and I think you provided some great insight into that. So thank you. Is there um, kind of just a super practical thing I'm going to kind of close out a bit with, and I would love to have more conversations with you in the future. And it's kind of around the, like let's discount someone's psychiatric status, like mental health status, a little bit, and talk purely about physical health. Are there any kind of physical concerns that you
Hmm.
look out for? Is it purely a high blood pressure thing, or is it bigger than that?
Yeah, high blood pressure. I dig in a little bit if somebody's had aneurysms or aneurysms in their family, immediate family. Um, I look at uh, what else do I look at on a physical level? I mean, obviously, any not just blood pressure, but any heart complications of any sort is worthy of further investigation. Um, and apart from that, not really, not
Cool.
really.
So like generally when we're working with the synthetic 5-MeO, the kind of like cardiotoxic risk that gets introduced by some of those other things is like a lot minimized, and then
And I also work with injection as well, and so
mm,
that isn't the lung element and is not really applied there. Yeah.
like
Mhm.
sub Q IM IV.
Intramuscular, yeah,
Yeah.
or sub Q or intramuscular. Generally, IM, but yeah.
Yeah, cool. And yeah, thanks for that. So what um I'll give you a few moments, like anything we like you think is really important to cover here that we didn't cover. We covered a lot of material, but
Yeah.
I want to give you a chance to like cover any kind of topics that we didn't maybe get a chance to dig into.
Well, I would say that when I guess I'm a proponent of seeing the growth of working with five in a therapy context. Um, I see that as something that's very positive because it lends to a practitioner um, being very um, creating a container for their participant that engages them. And it's very customized, very personalized, and we can really learn about the experience of what's happening with 5-MeO-DMT in an individual. But we also get to really learn about just the human experience in general, as well as how this can apply to a different individual with different factors, different profiles or um, psycho-emotional profiling. There's something there that I feel is really lacking in the world of five, and I've always been a little confused by that. Um, and I'd like to create a larger voice for that. And what I'm in the midst of doing, maybe at the beginning stages rather than being in the middle of it, is doing a little bit of a research project into my own practice and coming out probably with a book eventually. I'm looking at a period of time from 2020 to 2024. My notes and what I've accumulated in terms of my learnings of serving. I think the total is about 500 sessions that are one-on-one. Um, over that period of time. It works out to be about 300 different individuals. And so I'm starting to do a little research project. I think it is maybe the uh, largest chunk of qualitative data that could probably come out of anybody's experiences so far. I've been working, like I said, this is my 10th year of working. And uh, all of those sessions have been in a relatively streamlined formula of working in this therapy, the psycholytic, psychedelic hybrid therapy context. And I think that whether somebody, a practitioner, is working in a therapy context or not, there's a lot that can be learned from it. Um, it's not a something that's going to come out of academia, and so I'm looking for funding for that right now because it's a big chunk of data that I'm working with, and it's going to, I think, inform a lot of how we can expand already existing frameworks to include what 5-MeO-DMT is really sharing with us or teaching us in a way. And that to some degree is the value of dissociation, the value of transcendent experiences when they're done in an excellent way.
Mm, amazing. Chad, can you tell us a little bit about how people can uh, find you on your website and or work with you?
Yeah. ChadCharles.net. If you are listening from wherever you are, right on the homepage, there are links to book consultation or integration calls with me. I'm based in Toronto, and so most of the clients that come to see me are within Ontario, also Quebec, because I used to be based in Montreal. But people come from all over North America to come and have sessions with me. And so through my contact form on my website, just shout out and tell me what you're interested in and how I might be in service to you.
Brilliant. All right. Well, Chad, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing a lot of hard earned experience and wisdom. And I really hope we can do it again in the future.
Thanks a lot for your curiosity and bringing such a wide range of inquiry into a pretty important field.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thanks.
Bye.